Namo Guru Embe Namo Bidaya Namo Dharmaya Namo Sangaya Namo Guru Embe Namo Bidaya Namo Dharmaya Namo Sangaya Namo Guru Embe Namo Bidaya Namo Dharmaya Namo Sangaya Kande la ye gwen ye do ga ra ga sho zang bong de chon ze she ye ya bo gwen ye lo san se dan se ba ne de she so den ye nang ga sen de ben de se ze la ma ye be zong ga na lo de be se na xin ju den ba ye je ge ya shu su xie jie chun gui jia wei lo zhi ge za na wei yin yu da wei be ye la men zi wei tong zi zhen ben zhen de la jia ye wo shi ye na zo me do ji jian do be na zi de jia我家一直去见家族，是那心中切了去吧，感谢东面的那啥吧，另外一说每个季节，天板东把送的没得，明年就把这边说说。宁面对的忙的着了，去见旁边的着的也，我不去见老先生，大家上班特别热闹，其实老忙当不起呢，学会看了见见真真。接到上边的这什么，少节学节小包阿多，南到为这引来先吧，送着过了差多命啊，他们拿我说过热的，谁的蛮多民族人吧。他说今年上边电当着我滚了旁边，贴不了旗帜路上找吧，对面宁波人多世界，妹妹这边的见见人，前面前边往不上边。地我马里中在上边，看见开边左肩中高，路上旁边小老说我，妹妹这边的见，前面往不上边， 上界开别左界中国罗山朝北下拉说我妹妹这边的见见前面前边王伯江边铁波马列中上界开别左界中国罗山朝北下拉说我邦的扎维拉玛仁波大说结果了变的的就高的前边国内结束故中头也为主在多邦的扎维拉玛仁波大说宁可了变的的就高的前边国内乔当天梦我多在多邦的扎维拉玛仁波大说宁可了变的的就高的前边国内结束长久宁的么安就马上就没写了马日马街芒果南给我不说说让你一起的说也别用了唱着路的要唱高的高巴拉高的巴拉不得也说好的要唱高的高的巴拉高的巴拉三高的不得也说好的要唱高的高的巴拉高的巴拉三不得说给的东着要就结果没得那边见到天把这些别做操作这些那有所心别你有结没有大有学当作业中南老讲究帮助大年讲说钱大概学就让级别操能老老们的3年多吧说学当作业中南老讲大概学所能见着了并且这么学上节学到作业从南老讲究帮助大年讲说大概学就让级别操能的着了并且上节这么学甚至到这的头下老那么个样子我怎么说以后我是不去那个怎么去提醒特别学生
共同享受生绝嘛自己在当什么？
Let me remind every one of ourselves to take a moment and cultivate the highest form of motivation, seeking complete enlightenment for the benefit of all other sentient beings. And with that kind of at least contrived altruistic motivation, we should participate in this discourse on the wisdom gone beyond or prajna paramita.
这个群众这个是个产业的，这么新的产业的，现在挺有可能录的嘛，产业开始写，所以这些真么需要这个。
Where we left off in this presentation or the commentary, we talked about the importance of differentiating between definitive discourse and interpretive or interpretable discourse. In Tibetan word we call changye. We briefly looked at how different schools of Buddhist tenets of thought, they approach definitive and interpretive discourses. And so now we started to focus more on the distinction between definitive discourse and interpretive discourse from Prasangika, Madhyamika, or the highest Buddhist school of thought.
这个身上没下过大业，生意上也当下场上的人呢，天就上路了，生意上就是其他一样呢，真正的他所谓学能希望，真的让心着顾到，真能些让心去除了当不用这些位，我一生去，能下天的本呢，那些他的希望。 提定给主的内心的大为广大，如果一定的内做了，准备用处的，做的如果让这里，变得主的差不了，多为是典型这万凶啊，典型这万凶啊啦，如大把人的接受是不接受，龙体如的。 这个我你是那么下巴到北到不些呢？都有个么那么些个小些送的，西周得了点呢，用的程序一流，也当当，工程程序一流，成功的说吧送了，用的程序这同的呢，说了说呗，就学那。 那些希望个下人，到时候滚大一下人等，提到不用着一下人下的，东西这么点么了，加个数，这了数了数呢，数的那么大一数当，数上心之外的滚大一数，数上心去之外东北东西的，群一数的俺们数千一万的。 起码你说到不好，这个就学习了叫松说，现在我们让就把那路了，生意送个点半，没人，他也得原因别去的那个些呢，工作程序留了想用着你里面的点吧，常常就说吧。 这没多，你大家其实常给那些这些，所以是不小无事。我觉得，现在嘛的现在这就可能，我常看这些个事呢， the Chevashira Jamago, Chunu, this is wrong thing you about the Kundashi, that the Gaze Kudashi, he don't about the Yundu, that the change he wanted, two corners change he wants your things are not yet the Shagaris. What is the Shagaris? Didn't I to it over the Raji to the Tomba Yundu the job? Guni Namja Te the Penna. What is that? Two Navia do Shagripenna. Tapa did she was testing himself. Does she tag dead? Tata the Himashi, Titi could do this, making the double good up. You think the Nizu tribute, you do the Jodi, Jubaro the Pen. During the top of the Vitain, Jojo, about the she's also be sure, Lundi, Jodi, the moon is number dollars, number shop, dollars, Shane. There go my Shiva show, she is soon there. She did the ten Yumji Shamsi Liu Gedona Gunde Shamsi Liu Changdong to Trova Song La Yumji Shamsi Liu Shamsi Tongdun, Sula Sobi Shena. La Dashi Xiong, okay, Share, Dashi Gunda Share, the Ti Dong Yu Share, Share, Donny Chamatamba, Jagu So. Tell you so that's on. So the Nanda so da, so Ranshi Jabati, Gunda so. So Rayu Jabatombe Donny, the Shui so the Mama Sukseni Vada, Shima. In so dabao, the dirty she here, Java song so was. What did that Carsia? Shamji, you sing some together. Good day, Shivada, Tada, Yum Jiddu, Shabashi, Shamji, you said, Dina, Gunda, so Namda, so said, Yunju, so said, so said, singing some Namshashi, said, oh, these things did Shiva, that the Gondel, he was singing Namsha, the Kagaris. Shamji Lu somebody, Gaze Kuda, so Ranshi Gazi, Kuda, so she, so called the Namda, so because she wanted Nanda, so she, so Rayi to the Tombadi in the Nam Kaza, Dere Kaza, Chui so sin. That was tell you so that Namani, so la mother, the Sogoni was that. Sogoni Kaza. There were Gunda Nanda Suze, that's so he also Namda Suze. Kaza Sasoguni, she wanted Gaza Guda, she did the Yunushin, because she sings on Mingda and Tibetan, and young Shabu lose adding. You just have you lose a Shabashi will lose as you what did not this user. So that the Shabus were singing with Namsha says you or what the. The gorgeous things of Namsha, there's card of the world. What is
Chamshi Liu, the Niti Kundor, Chamshi Liu, the Niti Kundor.
Niti Kundo, Niti Nanze, Niti Liu, in the Chamshi Liu, what is Chabaki?
So as Krishna had read from the commentary and explained, now we are looking at things from Prasangika Madhyamika school of thought. Prasangika Madhyamika school of thought, they accept there is a particular chapter called Chamshuji Liu, chapter requested for by Maitreya. Okay? So that chapter is one of the chapters of 20,000 verses on wisdom gone beyond or Prajna Paramita, Niti. Okay? So that chapter requested for by Maitreya, Chamshuji Liu in Tibetan, is accepted as a definitive discourse, Gaden. And so in that chapter, Prasangika Madhyamika, I should say, deals with what we call three natures of phenomena or three characteristics of phenomena. The three characteristics of phenomena, at least the names are the same as Chittamartins really they talk about. There is what we call Quinta, imputed phenomenon. There is Shenwang, other dependent phenomena, and then there is Yongdu, thoroughly established phenomena. Chittamartins differentiate between these three characteristics of phenomena or the three natures, Sinyitsum, according to the Dodikongtel, Unraveling Thought Sutra, right? But the way these three natures or characteristics are explained in that chapter requested for by the Maitreya are different, slightly at least. Yeah? And so that's what the Prasangika Madhyamikas agree with. And so according to that chapter, for example, we looked at a form as an example, right? A form is referred to as an other dependent phenomenon or Shenwang. Okay? And another term they use is called Namda Jisu, literally means it is what we call pure form. Okay? I'm just taking the literal meaning here. Okay? Whereas intrinsicness or intrinsic reality is imputed onto that form, which in other words is form is perceived as intrinsically existent, isn't it? So that part of intrinsicness is called an imputed what we call phenomenon, okay, Kunta. And so in reality, a form is devoid of entry of intrinsic existence. So that is the final nature of a form, which is called thoroughly established phenomenon or Yongtu. Okay? So the form itself, right, if we say what is a form, right, the form is what we normally perceive as a form, which is called pure form. It is other dependent phenomena. And what is imputed onto the form, the intrinsicness, right, that actually doesn't exist, right? It's just an imputation. And a form devoid of intrinsicness is the thoroughly established phenomenon, but that's not a form. That is the ultimate nature of a form. So that's how Prasangika Madhyamikas differentiated among the three natures of the characteristics of a phenomenon according to the chapter in the 20,000 verses on Pranjana Paramita, the chapter called Chamshu Gilyu, Maitreya's request chapter. Okay.
What is it? There is decoding. Take back the curse and the Dakaji. Then Karsa the Daki Taka the Himashi, but Taka do Tuki hit the Taka the Yorava.
No.
They use it. They dream with the Yomara.
No.
That they dream with the good dance.
No.
That could have taken new Ganga, the Taka dream don't call it. Taka new radio. What did I? Show good eye don't cast that the wrong thing to it on the end Yunusino. Shadang the Taka used and Shadang. Tis the tree Daki Jixe. That was Dakshu Gaksati, Tito Tombachi, so we were Tinashi, and sure Tamjelia, so Daki Tit, Lakunda, Kuda, Tito Manilu, somewhere, what he sing you some with Nansha, or that the Shavu sing you some said, oh, Terry.
So, as stated in the chapter requested for by Maitreya, Chamshuji Liu, so those are how we differentiate the three natures or characteristics from each other, and which Prasangika Madhyamikas accept. The example they use is, a coiled rope that's misperceived as a snake, right? Now, if you look at that particular example, a coiled rope, which is the basis, right? That is, from example point of view, is other dependent phenomena, right? It's not a snake. It's the basis, right, upon which we misperceive a snake. A coiled rope is not a snake, but the misperception imputes snake onto it, right? That is an imputed reality or phenomenon, right? Something that doesn't exist, but it's projected onto the rope. But what is the reality? The reality is that rope is devoid of a snake, right? Being a real snake. That's the reality of that particular example, which is an example of thoroughly established phenomenon. Okay, and so this is how, according to Prasangika Madhyamikans, every phenomenon, everything that exists has these three natures or characteristics, isn't it? Right? So whatever the basis is, that is other dependent phenomenon. And then, although it does not exist intrinsically, but intrinsicness is projected onto a basis, isn't it? And so that is an imputed phenomenon, right, which is the object of negation. It doesn't exist that way, but we project onto that impute. And what's the reality? Well, every phenomenon is empty of intrinsic nature or existence. So that is the emptiness of a phenomenon, which is what called thoroughly established phenomenon. So we are using those terminology, Yungtup in Tibetan.
I kiso sung bi cherse. No din ju de tadare go ni sung na ba kya ba to ba she ne. Do ko ma na ba she ba she he sung de shi zu ti la ten ne. Yom ji cham shi liu nge dong dang. Gong zhe cham shi liu chang dong zhu zhe ba sung la. Yom ji cham shi liu ki tong de na. Solo sobe xue na la, dang xi xiongwa re, yu xa re, dang xu gu da yi xa re de, ti dobo yun zhe xa re xa ne, dong yi cha mo de ba la, ya gu su. O ti da, se da da di shem yu liu sen yi song zhong su di xie wu de zang la, in de gong zhe xie wa sen yi song nam xa de da mi de me xa yo re si. Di xa yi za di shem yu liu da, gong zhe shem yu liu xie da, ni zhe shem yu liu xie da da di, ka ka xie ku ri si wu da.
Gong zhe na le cham shi liu xie.
Gong zhe na gong zhe liu xie, do de gong zhe ko la tanga xia xie ro wa.
Di na cham shi liu ya ma ro.
Di da gong zhe sen yi song xie ya xie da, shem yu liu sen yi song xie ya xie, yin xie ro wa.
No.
Da de la chu ni ka xie ge, shem yu liu sen yi song da, gong zhe di sen yi song jik pa xie ni, chu ni, ma wo do wa. O di ka ka yo, di xie ni, di da, mo xiang tong hu, li xie jing bu tong, ka xie da, shem yu liu guo di, ni wo xiu xie wa ro, di. 现在这是空气看看去吧，他的相信留个同的嘛，现在是弄下的下午的让，到这工这里下的看的是吧？到这工这工大上个新不是，希望有上这种效果是吧？这这刚刚新不是下是吧？现在我看看也不听下过是吧？我就是。
So according to Prasangika Madhyamikans, the three natures or the three characteristics which are described in Dode Kongtel, Unraveling Thought Sutra, so that discourse is interpretable discourse, right? Whereas the three natures or the characteristics described in the chapter requested for by Maitreya, a chapter which is part of the 20,000 stanzas on Pranjana Paramita, is regarded as a definitive discourse or Nyeten in Tibetan. Okay? And so how the chapter requested for by Maitreya explains the three natures of the characteristics of phenomena, and how the Unraveling Thought Sutra describes the three natures of the three characteristics of phenomena are not one and the same thing. So many people get confused. They think they are one and the same thing, and then they muddle up all of that explanations there. Okay? And because in the Unraveling Thought Sutra, the way three natures of characteristics are described are, as said, Kunta rang tsinyi ji marushin. Imputed phenomena, right, do not exist by way of their own characteristics. Shemada yundu rang tsinyi duwa. Other dependent phenomena and thoroughly established phenomena do exist intrinsically, right? That's how the Chittamatrins accept it, isn't it? But for the Pasangika Madhyamikans, that's not what it is. So it requires interpretation. It's an interpretive discourse, isn't it? But in the chapter requested for by Maitreya, the three natures are explained as that every phenomenon has a basis of labeling or imputation. That basis is another dependent phenomenon. And what is imputed onto that is something that doesn't exist, which is the intrinsicness or intrinsic reality. That is an imputed phenomenon. Okay? But what the reality is that every phenomenon is devoid of, empty of intrinsic existence. So that emptiness of every phenomenon, that is a thoroughly established phenomenon. So as we can see, the explanations of the three natures or discourses are not exactly the same thing. Of course, the more of these things are really presented in Lecture Nyingbo, the essence of eloquent explanation.
Namda Susan, choosing this, I think you're so moony rigor. That good out Susan, Gaja is Yomarwa. That Namda Susan, because I did chewing Susan, did Nilu to the Tony Chamoti, or the singing some shadow to Shagris.
So in the chapter requested for by Maitreya, explains the three natures characteristics that way. So let's say we use a form as an example, and that is the basis, right? And it is called other dependent phenomena or Shenwang. And it is called a pure form, but in my football, pure form is a real form. That's what it is, right? And what's imputed onto that is something it doesn't have, which is intrinsicness onto the form. So that intrinsic quality imputed, projected onto the form is called imputed form. Gunda, right? Is an imputed reality. It is not there. And the actual nature of the form is it's empty of intrinsic existence, which is called the reality form, right? The emptiness form. Okay? So of these three forms, which is the real form? Well, it is the basis itself, right? Which is called the pure form. Okay? That is the real form, whereas the imputed form is not a form, right? Anyway, it doesn't exist. And the emptiness form is not a form, right? That is the final nature of the form. So those are the language they use. Namda Jisu, pure form, and Kunda Jisu, imputed form, and Chuying Jisu, emptiness form. Okay.
Namda Karza, the Karza, the corner this to Karza, the Namda to Karza, so wrong thing to Gunda, so wrong you see the Tomate Nam Kaza Namda, so do Shatati, Shajani, Tina Yadalaya, and Namda does Namda Somson Jani, Namda Dada, Namda so and Namda Swing is already conscious about journey. So times about those Jayaris.
So now, hope you got it, right? So we will repeat it, that the form itself, which is the basis, which is called other dependent phenomenon, and it's called pure form, or the real form, right? And then intrinsicness is imputed onto it, which is imputation, that's called imputed form. It doesn't exist. And the form in actuality is empty of intrinsic existence. That is the emptiness form. So that emptiness is what we call the subtle, like emptiness or the selflessness, right? According to the person Gigas. Now, just as we could talk about these three characteristics or nature of a form, now we can apply the same logic or the same thing every other phenomenon, or right? For example, sound. We can talk about three sounds, right? There is the pure sound or the real sound, let's say. Then there's the imputed sound, intrinsicness imputed onto the sound. And then the sound is empty of intrinsic existence, which is the emptiness sound. So every phenomenon has these three natures or characteristics.
Deda Jashir Tangi Namji Sole Shiba Shavusa. Sheda Shamju Lu Tada sings Nasha Shesana, and Shamju Lu sings Sukarang singing Marashi or Gure Kundarang singing Shimoyang singing Shigara. Sheda Konika Tika Haku, Jaku Jesu. She did Nasha Jeva in the Karsa. Here go in the Changel Hijim was a Takuris. Or this is Changel Hijim, Shabju Liu Quade, Joa Hebal, Kazes Medus. So the jet was a Jeva here, his song. The Jenny would give you or did how we say. So Joe Shinatana Dikoranta, Shabju Kaza, Gundele, Shima Rosie, Dokuda River, Shabju Lulu Shota Rosie, Murder, she did. Kai take a daughter of the world. She not good. That daughter, the ship of Chicago, shame sooner. In the Ligeni was the here, she said, in the shades of yes.
So the author of the commentary tells us that how the three natures or characteristics are described, explained in the chapter requested for by Maitreya, Chamshuji Liu, and how they are described in the Unraveling Thought Sutra are not same at all, and in the Unraveling Thought Sutra, as we know that Gwinda, imputed phenomena do not exist intrinsically, right? Whereas other dependent phenomena and thoroughly established phenomena do exist intrinsically, right? So they agree with intrinsicness there, with dependent phenomena and the thoroughly established phenomena. But in the chapter requested for by the Maitreya, nothing exists intrinsically at all, right? So they cannot be one and the same thing. One says there are certain things exist intrinsically, but other says nothing. As a matter of fact, that all phenomena are same, that they do exist conventionally. They are conventionally existent, same. And they are same in that they are empty of intrinsic existence, right? So that's how the chapter requested for by Maitreya tells us. So as Geshe explained, that for detailed sort of explanation on this, we need to study the Tangye Lekshe Nyingbo, essence of eloquent explanation, differentiating between definitive and interpretable discourses. And of course, other commentaries have tried to explain the chapter requested for by Maitreya, but no one has really done it as good a job as Lama Tsongkhapa. Lama Tsongkhapa really extensively gives a commentary based on that. So for details, we need to look up in the essence of eloquent explanation. Tangye Lekshe Nyingbo.
What yes, that did she without Chudula Chara Tobe Lamji Jozula Chuda Ume Devatarji, Moba in the Shivatarji, Rabe without Judu Tobe Lamji down. Tenju a Shiva try without the Judu Tobe Lamji Niva Le Ronjiba Menji. Lamangama Zamji Jang Siva Choa Chunima Shela. Teyang Medaso, Juju Nangne, Kansa Raja Tebe Zegi Tongbe. Dami was those who come a ship, Shiva Lamdi, Chue, Lamdi, Chue, Topsi Lam, Muti, number he, Topsi Lam Muti, Lam Muedam, number Lam Muedam, number Hinam, Dikishige, Taps Shagode, Mumba Kudira, Davi Ishigi, Numa Poata, number Lama Nati Yons Joe, Taps Songa, Namde Leja, Tony Treji, Gomalama Tedoni, Kiama Dar Tedoni, she, Mama the Sons, Ditoni Javatan, Rajas with Tombe, Damila Show, Tony Damila Show, Roger Meje, Kazarang Sing Tribute, Tomba Kazak Dame to Minjoja, Kazarang Sing Juba, Kazarang Sing Juba Zema, Young Kazak Danzidu, Mijabane Tidaga Ranzi Shibi, Ange Yino, Tiju Kazak Dame Chamo Dobala. Young Kazara he about Tombato Gobato. Tide Dami Chamo Dobe, Lam Denda. Tito Panga Sabo Bambi. Go Denzo, Cheju, Cherry, Medas Juru. Those who come as you call Joe here, Hedo. Oh, Hedos. Dive Kaza Ransi Juba Tomba, Kaza Dameta, Kaza Ransi Juba Zeba, Kaza Danzi, Joba Netanya, Ranzi Mishibi, Angino was it. What did Dematome, Treji Hizo, Suba Linji, Gitoya, Deda Kona, Tarsheba Shaw was, or did that Karsa, did that. The good Changi Jojo Gonde Sombada in Chamju Soma Tada, singing some Nasha Mendra Tinashi, in the Dijimita Suruka, in the Struta Oma Ranji Misha, the Mrs. Rakbashi, the Chabo Yisha, Rakbatoma in the Tabata Shawara, but Dodo was the Dame Chibasonza. Kaza Dami Rabato Sanji Shasho, Dika Shida, Tada 10 euros, and the Kaza Dami Rabak Tabaza Tomio Maris, Shida Dikadu, the Cheba Yoyadi, or Dika Gazeshani, Rang Sing to the Midava Shani, Shada, and the Gun Chabu Lioda, the Gundri Shidi Mida Chunguris, and Tahanaji, Joda Oma, the Rabbi Miza Juruda, Yan Tenyo Miza Juru Kazu Kakayori, Miza Juru Kazu Kakaris. Tenyo Miza Juru Mazoba, Juda Mashabe, Rabbi Miza Juru, then Tava the Tajisha kind of top to Maris,
Just as we find differences between how the three natures or the three characteristics are described in the chapter requested for by Maitreya and Unraveling Thought Sutras. And so, the bottom line is that such differences are due to, the difference in terms of identifying objects of negation, right? What's being negated or refuted. So that's why those differences have come about. In the same way, with regard to the Four Noble Truths and their 16 attributes such as impermanence, right? We can find, again, the differences between the lower Buddhist schools of thought and Prasangika Madhyamika, right? What is explained and accepted by the lower Buddhist schools of thought, meaning Saivatantrika, Madhyamika, and the schools below within Buddhism, are regarded as, from Prasangika point of view, a course, presentation of the Four Noble Truths and the 16 attributes. That is. For example, the kind of selflessness they talk about is the selflessness of a self-sufficient and substantially existent self of a person, right? If you realize that, according to them, then you can achieve nirvana and maybe you can achieve Buddhahood, right? But for Prasangikas, forget about Buddhahood. If you realize that kind of selflessness, you are not even going to achieve nirvana or freedom from samsara, right? So Prasangika's presentation of the 16 attributes of the Four Noble Truth, relatively speaking, are subtle, presentations. And so why do we find such differences? It has to do with how different schools have come to describe or identify object of negation or gaksha, object of refutation, what's being refuted, what is being negated there. So due to such differences, we find differences between the Prasangika standpoint and the other Buddhist schools of thought, a standpoint in regards to Four Noble Truths and 16 attributes. For Prasangika Madhyamikas, one has to, realize what we call subtle selflessness or emptiness, isn't it? In order to achieve both nirvana from samsara and enlightenment. So what is presented and accepted in the lower schools of Buddhist thought, Saivatantrika, Madhyamika, and down below, is not adequate for us to even achieve liberation. So in the lower Buddhist schools of thought, where they do accept the Four Noble Truths, the 16 attributes, among these 16 attributes are Tong, literally emptiness, and Tangme, selflessness, right? And the remaining 14 attributes are, what we call, are more like secondary, things to be able to understand or realize what they call Tong, emptiness and selflessness, isn't it? Emptiness and selflessness are the liberating paths, and the remaining 14 attributes are just to be able to, sort of ripen your mind stream for them, or to be able to understand and realize them. So as we just stated that in the lower schools of Buddhist thought, from Savatantrika, Madhyamika, and down to Vaibhashikas, so they see among the 16 attributes, 14 attributes are kind of part of the process to be able to understand Tongpa, emptiness, and Dharma, selflessness. Okay. And the emptiness that really they talk about here is more of the what called emptiness of a self-sufficient and substantially existent self, which is the selflessness of a person, according to them. You know, and so that's good enough to be able to achieve liberation. And so they quote, for example, Abhidhamma Samukkhya, compendium of knowledge, right, where it stated that the remaining attributes, meaning the 14 attributes, are meant to be able to understand or develop, understanding of emptiness and selflessness. And they also quote Pramana Vartika, valid cognition, Samanamde in Tibetan, where it said, you will be liberated by realizing emptiness. The remaining meditations are just for that. In other words, the remaining attributes meditating is just for the sake of realizing emptiness. So those are the sources they quote to be able to support their standpoint. And so they do not accept emptiness of intrinsic existence as emptiness or selflessness, because for them things do exist intrinsically, isn't it? So that's not emptiness. So now you can see that for Pasangikas, right, there is nothing that exists intrinsically, right? Pasangika talks about emptiness of intrinsic existence. So that's a huge difference between the lower Buddhist school of thought and the Pasangika school of thought.
Tide dame chama to go lamden dang. Ti to ki bangja sawan bangbe se gogde so chi ju chai me da sudu dozu koma shebe le koali choa chugo ba shedo dibe be kanza ran ye jube tongba kanza dame dang kanza ran hi chuban zeba kanza dang zi du joba ne tanye de ran zen shi mi shewe ne ang yi no wo de deba tong ji shi shi ze zeba zilin ji to de da khona tar sheba shao se o de da de jubda ma da te yo zeba sha di o zeba yi se o di zeba de duzu midim de kare se na kaza da me che da mi ni ya gagje chewa sha yi za jubda o me gagje chewa sha te yo shi chu ji ma de gagje chewa sha go ma
No.
se da di zeba jo yin za gagje ne ga de wo te re su se
No. So as compared to the presentation of Four Noble Truths and 16 attributes in the lower Buddhist school of thought, Pasangika's presentation on the same subject or topic is subtle in that sense, right? And so Pasangika's, profound that a person is empty of intrinsic existence. So that is the emptiness of a person or selflessness of a person. Okay? And that's a subtle, right, from the other point of view. Whereas phenomena are empty of intrinsic existence, so that's the emptiness of phenomena. But from Pasangika point of view, emptiness is emptiness. There is no qualitative difference in terms of emptiness of a person and emptiness of phenomena, right? The difference is the basis upon which the emptiness is established, isn't it? So that emptiness needs to be realized, which is subtle from the other perspective, we can say, compared to that, in order to achieve liberation and enlightenment. So as we talked about this before, So the debate between the lower Buddhist schools of thought, schools of tenets, Drupta, Siddhant, and Prasangika with regard to truth or reality, really it boils down to, in terms of identifying what is being negated or refuted, isn't it? Because of that difference, so they come up with a different standpoint with regard to, realities, emptiness, or selflessness there. So in terms of identifying and presenting on avidya or ignorance, Thoma Maripa, there is a difference, again, we can see between the lower Buddhist schools of thought and Prasangika school of thought. So according to the lower Buddhist schools of thought, the root of samsara, why we are in samsara, is of course ignorance, but what kind of ignorance? It is ignorance with regard to self of a person. And even though there is no self-sufficient, substantially existent self, we think there is one, belief, so we grasp at it. Because of that grasping, we create karmas, and so because of karma and disillusions, we go round and round in samsara, right? If that's what it is, then according to them, in order to uproot that grasping at such a self, we need to realize the emptiness or the selflessness of self-sufficient and substantially existent self of a person, right? Then that can liberate you, right? So that's their whole presentation about that. So which, according to Prasangika, is a very gross level of grasping and, right, not the subtle one. According to Prasangikas, yes, the root of our samsara is again ignorance, but what kind of ignorance? Ignorance of grasping at intrinsic existence of everything that exists, isn't it? Things are not intrinsically existent, that includes self of a person and all phenomena, but we believe they do, and because of that grasping, we create karmas, and then, along with the karma and that grasping, other delusions, we go round and round samsara. Now, if we want to be free from samsara, now we need to uproot that grasping, means we need to realize emptiness of intrinsic existence, And so which, relatively speaking, is the subtle, if you will, emptiness or selflessness, and this is the big difference, even within Buddhist schools of thought, right? How we are in samsara and how we can get out of samsara.
Rana Chara Shava Zamji Gone. Tijiran Mado. Samji Gone, Chena Mado Ba. Teaches you Midas Dungitavula Ram Gune Chara Sheminute Midav Nashi Yinka Tay Midavi Shiri Wamata Songs. That did it because the Midas Chara you said, so Cardi Dame Kona Chara you shall do Digo the Shari Mazin. Medaba the doing us to the Taraka Yomas. Tell you I shall not die, because it to the omission and see what is.
So when we say that there is a difference in terms of coarseness and subtlety with regard to the Four Noble Truths and 16 attributes among the Buddhist schools of thought, right, the lower schools of thought as compared to the Prasangika, really that kind of subtlety or coarseness is only in terms of how selflessness is established, isn't it? It really has nothing to do with the nature of suffering and impermanence, right? The suffering is suffering as it is presented. All schools of thought accept it, and impermanence, right? When we think in terms of like the subtle impermanence or gross impermanence, that's accepted by all Buddhist schools of thought. So the subtlety and coarseness is really in terms of understanding the root cause of samsara and presenting emptiness or selflessness.
What did that? Look there, that go there to the Kajasana. Tinsari. Mato songs. Rabbe go there and go by Yini Shaves. You move your ratio Bangwa Zamsi, Shani Shava Yimbe. Take woman the shave and go there in Ja. Bangsa Kanga, Asabo Mabombe. Sabon Babi Shani Shava Mambi. Go there singing by Menjote. Momba Yini, Shivi, Jajama Shenos. So that Momba Yini Shiva Kazata Kato, see that go there, send you a minor, Lamde, send you a minor. Till Lamde, send you a minor. In the tea, top of Jajama said there. Momma here, Jajam Sarmas, Chita Jajam, only the Omarwa.
So with regard to Gaden, truth of cessation, okay, how truth of cessation is, explained in the Ngumba, basket of knowledge, or basket of knowledge, is that you can achieve truth of cessation by overcoming kind of manifest forms of afflictive emotions or delusions, right? Really, you are not required to uproot the seeds of delusions, right? If you overcome or the manifest forms of delusions, then you achieve the truth of cessation. Yeah, but from Prasangika Madhyamika point of view, that truth of cessation is really not truth of cessation. We call like no. Thank you very much. That we accept that it is the truth of cessation presented in the knowledge treatises, but it's really not the truth of cessation, because you still have the seeds of delusions, right? How can you? Truth of cessation in my footnote is the same as attaining nirvana, right? Okay, my footnote grows, by the way, and so therefore, arahats, that are described in the knowledge treatise or the Ngumba are really not real arahats. They have only overcome manifest forms of delusions, right? Achieved that truth of cessation as explained there, but in reality, they have not uprooted the delusions, so therefore they are called arahats, but they are not arahats. Yeah, so that's the what's being talked about. So why is that? Because with regard to the true path, that path itself is not, right, the adequate path to uproot the delusions, right? And so their path is, again, the true path presented in the knowledge treatises, but it's not a true path, right? If we look at it from the higher school point of view. Right? Yeah.
어디다 가서天就 龙的 다음에 참고 또 왜세 돈은 맞아봐 가루지 소지 주라 라베 다음에 주로 미다 주로 고서 또 돈은 또 내셔 고서 여봐 해도 스데다 다들 런지 메들 내셔 고서 해야 될 파페 줄만 샤고 있어 말아
맞아.
다天就 소지 주라 내셔 고서 샤셔 리스 라베 다음에 미다 주로 고서 또 로데 내셔 고서 요리스 어디에 치와 요리스 그세
with regard to what are called direct or non-conceptual yogic perception, right? Non-conceptual or direct yogic, that's the key perception. Lower Buddhist schools of thought says such a perception only exists within the Aryas or the transcendental beings. Okay? Ordinary beings cannot have it. Okay? Whereas Prasangika Madhyamika say no, ordinary beings could have a direct yogic perception. So that's a big difference here between the lower Buddhist school of thought and Prasangika.
개대 도도냥의 계속성 늘 콘대의 남자 도주 현들라 타바냥대 타바 당 냥대 동지라 그걸라 타주 코와 희샤와 대거의 냐는 레요장게 쟁리是预备的교환의 마음 인정적으로 차들 코와 무인데 루즈게 게드 중에 세바 시계와 해당 게라레자 게종레 측중 타와 계송세 저 코와 랑라 때에 샤지 레섬 소자캬나 코코나 앙메디 겨알레비 심진콜 강하콜나 니레 부보 라콜 강도 제다콜나 시데는 남이 파들 무고에 갑조세자 메바콜 게강콜나 레다 니모지 콜라 대한 손은 많이 벨 레다 니모제야 아기 님도 콜시 디 베메고바 라그나게 조바토 소노데 메요레다 뉴모베 안게 데조 코르라 디 조남라 베조 셴부 도고베시 카데 도알롱레 데조데 뉴르네 세페데 뉴르 조아데 사셴부 디오도 디네 셴부데 데조 조아데 샤세 이세모시베 뒤에다 송비실 리과 조주베 제바지 녀월레 베포보가이 코아랑 오 해당 남절레 등에 코아제 봉고 시베 롱다그네 레조조 온게세 강나 코르기 껴랑베 녀레 봉보데 등에 대바임바 조데제 코아고니 날씨 바다로스 어디다 코아 코스 가서 코디니샤 어디가 가서 뜻어자 코아스 가서 네오그베 겨알레 라마멜라데 코아스 그래서 네오 코아 어디서 저 코아이스 다티미다 롱모모도와 내 코아랑 때문에 샤지 렌섬 샤나 강코는 엉매도 코와 겨알이 심신스가 가서 코와지 심신스 공개스르스는 심신 코와 공개들이 강나 코는 니레 풍보실 코스 니레 보세도 니레 풍보 가서 겨알린시 니와레 풍보세 나기 사기 두게 참으려 니레 풍보서로 대대적으로 냠도 자네 어디 코에나 디고 될 니네 보고 코스에 들이스 강도 시다 코나 Sita Nami Parcosita, Coseta, Yulu de Rova.
No.
Sita Nami is the only cause it comes from the Korea.
No.
Corsa of Teresi. The Korea, the Korean, oh, Del Jolly, Jim, you do Korea, the Koa course. Yes.
So according to Prasangika Madhyamikas, even ordinary beings could have direct yogic perception with regard to the Four Noble Truths and the 16 attributes. Whereas the lower Buddhist schools of thought said that's not possible, it only exists within the transcendental beings or the Aryas. Okay. So now the next thing that Geshe read and talked about is, we often deal with what we call Korde, samsara, and beyond samsara, right, or nirvana. So what does it really mean, korva, samsara, right? So who are in samsara, and what is samsara, and how do we end up in samsara, right? So these are the things, if we think about. Of course, sentient beings, ordinary sentient beings are the ones who are in samsara, right? So we are the agents, so to speak, right? And how do we end up in samsara? Well, it's because of delusions, afflictive emotions, and contaminated karmic actions, right? They, they make us take continuous rebirth with these contaminated aggregates. So we are bound to the contaminated aggregates by karma and delusions, right? So these make us trapped in samsara, go round and round in samsara. Well, then, if you think of samsara as a location, so what is it, right? If you tell us the kind of borderline in the samsara, tell us the border of samsara, well, it is from the peak of cyclic existence, Sije, to the avijji hell, the lowest hell, right? This is almost like the territory of samsara, right? So within this territory or borderline, so we sentient beings, because of our contaminated karmic action and delusions, we keep on continuously being reborn and acquiring these contaminated skandhas, right? The aggregates. So this is how we should understand samsara. So samsara means it refers to this process of acquiring continuously contaminated aggregates due to karma and delusions, right? So that's what we meant by samsara, and in terms of territory or the location, so it is in between the peak of samsara, Sije, and the avijji hell, the narme, the most torturous hell, right? So this is where, in other words, we often talk about the three realms of existence, isn't it? So these are the locations, so to speak, within which the samsaric beings wander in samsara.
What did that Korsa the Siva of the ship? The Korea that the Korean can't conquer Leoji on Koras, Led Yumuni. So Led Yumuni tells the Sonum maybe less at the Bigot yet. That led Yumuji Karzang and Yandro course. Korki, Beme Goba, Rang Mangi Juba Township. That let me go taking Yandro Jiggy. Sonum dam Bio led them. Tea Yumu be on with the Ndokoala. Tea Jula Bezo Shambo Dogu. Kade. Dua longle, Dendro dang, Yendro de per the Yendro and Doa, Sashabu Dudam. Tinin, Dendro, Dinin the per the Dendro Doa, Shase is the wood, Chevy, Dudan Jawa, Sumbi, Ribatu Jabe, Javari, Nyali, Popoga, the Koa, Rango, Shedam. Namdilla, doing Koa Jefumbu, Chevy, Lungi. Lion call a corking, Jala Benjili would do it by him. Two days, call one, not Shivataros, doing it by the quiet was a quasi de Leon, Romami, Jawali, Javatil course. 동해도 풍부하는 거와 이니까 지금서 말이. 어디다 코리아에 거기 손님이 내서는 내 겨와체 내저게 미자다. 손님이 내서는 미가 세 그래서 니저게체 미요 내서는 에 소도 수미자 감고자 내다 미요 리스. 어다 뒤섬 가는지 가지다 디제 잡고 대반 조사야 봐. 어딜 지르게 리스. 다 레야가서는 사드 미제 도가서는 니저 니와 이다서 어디 리스 뜻이서.
So ordinary sentient beings go round and round. That the word samsara or the korva has sense of rotating, going round and round. That's the word in Tibetan, right? So that's why I'm saying going round and round, because otherwise in English word it's not coming out. Of course we say cyclic existence, right? Samsara. And by what conditions? Of course, because of our karma and delusions, nyamo, right? And in the footnote, not by choice. So this is right, Geshe didn't say. So as Geshe explained, so the samsara has, as we know, relatively speaking, fortunate states of rebirth or good migrations, and unfortunate state of rebirth or bad migrations, isn't it? Yeah. So if we create what is called non-meritorious karmic actions, the other way of saying is negative karmas, and then this precipitate our rebirth in the bad migrations, right? Or the unfortunate state of rebirth, right? Hell, pretas, hungry ghosts, and animal world. But if we create the meritorious karmic actions or the positive karmic actions, then we end up in fortunate rebirths as humans and divine beings, you know. But both are in samsara. So the good karmas make us wander in the good states of rebirth in samsara, and the bad karmas make us wander in the bad states of rebirth in samsara. Of course, often we talk about three types of karma, right? The positive karma or meritorious karmas yielding in good rebirth in samsara, and non-meritorious karma, sona mai belle or negative karma, resulting in unfortunate rebirth. And then this called miyuvelle, literally translating unchanging karma or immutable karma, right? The immutable karmas, results in rebirth in the form and formless realms of existence. So of course, there are what are called the better states of rebirth in samsara and the worst states of rebirth. So it is really difficult to be in a fortunate state of rebirth in samsara. But it's very easy to be in the unfortunate states. In the Dual Lung, Vinaya transmission, discourse, sutra, metaphor examples are given, as Geshe explained, that in terms of those of us, in other words, the possibilities to be reborn in the bad migrations of samsara is as many as the dust particles on this great earth, right? So these dust particles are really nobody can count. But in terms of finding good rebirth in samsara is as few as the dust particles picked up on Buddha's fingertip, right? Only that. So that means even within samsara, to be able to have fortunate rebirth in the footnote like this is very rare and very difficult.
Dena chime rambar gome ba sile jungla roata di mon pumbar chibe punga ko shin sheda Sisi Mari Ongi, Kiunam, Meda Lani Yinson, Lamsumbo, Joangabotadi, Miki Kor, Benazangi Pangla Kora, she Joanamas, Lam Jungar, Punagi, Puada, Zangeji, Panglatar, Koa Songso, Jugata, Madam Mayenzembe, Jigje, Onge, Koanam, Ramameva Koa, Suju the Ramameva, Suju Shugata, Jawa, Tendo, Suju, Tabeda, but Simjano, Lino, Jimbata. Te Kongel Ralevata, Simji Sivakoati, Majis Madu, Namji Hila, Ralevata. Titrombe Sadze Kundu, Koaktar, Koata, Doanam, Sidney, Nameji Pala, Koatam. Tito the Rangi, Joshing, Kender Jebala, Bezon Shimbo. Kend Jamala, Bedo Shivo Govatar, Doanam, Yudo Rang Doji, Dedo Doala, Bedo Shivo Govatam. The Kovet say Naji, Kurum Yekavatar, Doanam, Siva Kovet say, Tenge Yena Juniji, Naji Kurum Yekavatam. The Kovet say, Punji Zigba. Jobata, Joanam, Siva Koe, say, Dungin Somje, Yang Navate. Choosing number 2 Jani Song So, Kuala Tavi Yang Dine, Little J, Tengopa de Titarawala, Titarawa Late, Shevata, Numu Maluba, Pangbe Soso Tango di, Tarba Yinla, Tia Shime, Yang De Gu Dumashi. Tabe go watam. My God, Jajing, Dodeva Yinshi, did Dushi, did Dumashi, Jedam, Mingad, Dedo, Ronjiba, Yangdela, they may get shy away. Shading, 10 years there, Tono de Bechava shadows, that is called Koduji, called Tarjisi, what he needed. Koya de Leon Koroti, Suju Shugonashi, Madu Lela was a yard, the Draja, the Kalika is. In the Ziragalia, in the Suju Shugosa, Truman apart to be Zigbar Shak, to the Dam Shaya Nashi, in the Koa Kosi Regalabe, Sulu Doshin Shaya Mars, Jaka Nasha, Dungamo Party, Nan, and dressing, Dungamo Yonse, and Koris, but it's a Koya Nimu.
So we are dealing with the concepts of Korwa, samsara, cyclic existence, and Nyangde or Nirvana or state beyond. And of course, right now we are talking about samsara, and so we talked about who are wandering or trapped in samsara, basically us ordinary sentient beings, and how do we end up doing this because of our karma and delusions. And so we find ourselves wandering in between the peak of cyclic existence and Mosavici hell, and sometimes we find ourselves in better rebirth, most of the time in the bad rebirth. It's much harder to get in the better rebirth, but very easy to be reborn in the bad migration. So those are things we just talked about. So while we are in samsara, it's not like we get any kind of a break, so to speak. We constantly experience different types of suffering, suffering of birth, suffering of aging, suffering of sickness, suffering of death, and many other forms of suffering, right? So in the Buddhist literature, especially in the supplement to the Middle Way, Madhyamik Avatar, there's mention of how first there arises a grasping at I, and then grasping at mind, And just like the irrigation rotating wheel that we go in samsara, right? And we experience all kinds of suffering. And a footnote, and it's very hard to translate that example, and even Jeffrey only used the bucket, right, which worked to some extent but didn't work as I can see. But it's easy to say bucket being sent into the well, right, go deep down and pulling of the water, right? Even the bucket, it hits the wall of the inside wall of the well, and bucket gets, marked, and just like that, we constantly experience all kinds of suffering while in samsara. So there is no real, break. No.
Oh, dear, that. The Korea, Pindi Doshi. Chuzung number 2, Johnny Songsos, Koa Kodiri. Koa the Tavi Yangan, Lusuji, Tengo about the Tavala, the tea, Shevata, Yumuma Lebara, Pambe Sosu Tango, Tava Yina. Tia Shimai, Yangdi Yumu, Dumashi, Tabe Mobotam. Mainga, Shidajin. Dodeva Yinji. Dumashi, Menga, the Tarvas, Ronji, Yangdela, Demaniga Chayo, this, Yangdes, Numubama Bamba Kaji. Thank you, tell a tondo de Chava Shados, the Shozu de Takaji. Thank you, Gode Tono de Maisha, Timmy Jibarga. O Terita Kaji, Koran, Tabat, Koas and the Torsa comes on Cordon Shet. Till Tarvas is, but Tarvas said there is a young day Dumashiri, when is a Tavas Dumashiri. Or did that telephone to those who's dead, do the woman do your yes or this?
So when we use that, it's like kind of Ferris wheel, I should say, but a water irrigation system, right? That needs a description. That works much better as an example how we're in samsara instead of just a bucket being sent into the well. Then I remember that's how Jeffrey translated. He's a great translator. So if you can use that kind of Ferris wheel water irrigation system, then it really is easy to talk about the 6 similarities between that example and how we're samsara. With a bucket, it doesn't work at some point. I remember this very well ages ago. So anyway, so Geshe did not do the comparison here. So now we talk quite a bit about samsara. What does samsara mean? Being in samsara mean? What makes us go around in samsara? And how do we experience suffering constantly here? So now the concept we talk about is the nirvana or beyond samsara, right? And which is defined technically as analytical state of cessation of all delusions, right? Soso tango, right? Which means analytical cessation of all delusions. Of course, I'm literally translating here, and that is called Gaden, state of true cessation, or nirvana, or the liberation there, synonyms. And it is regarded as what we call unproduced state, dumache, right? Of course, different schools of thought have slightly different way of explaining it, but according to Prasangika Madhyamikas, this state of cessation, this nirvana, this liberation state, it is what they call Dandamteba, the ultimate truth. Okay? So we will stop here today, and happy to welcome your questions. First, we will go to our Dharma friends if they have in the Cyprus space. No, okay. So then it's all ours. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Take it away.
Yes. Let me see if I gather my thoughts here. So first there's grasping at I, and then there's grasping at mine.
Yes.
And And at the same time, I had to look it up to make sure I didn't have it backwards. Nagarjuna in the Precious Garland, he goes, as long as there's grasping at the aggregates, there is grasping at self. When there's grasping at self, there's karma and rebirth. So, and I've heard this before, where first there's the appearance of the realness of the aggregates, and on the basis of that, then there's a grasping at an I. So, if I were to loop both statements together, what Geshe-la said and what Nagarjuna said, would we be saying that first the aggregates appear as real, then we grasp at them, then an I appear, we grasp at the I, and then we label the aggregates as a mind. Is that how it's working?
Okay, I understood what you said. Yeah. Mora kandi shue di sigor ke. Ta tanda bena uma jukben na ya tangbo nga she ta la shen ju shi da di sing wala chak jab se chorwa ge. Di da dene rinjen chwa na mora ta ro da de shig do wa. Si si pongbo jin yu ba di da la ngan jin yu la chorwa ge. Ta di me ni doming go ta so ro ge. Di la da che de ka ya da di tang jin ke da de sing me de ro ge. Tangbo pongbo di ka so da rang shin ju ban temba de ban nang ro ge. Dene temba du da ta ro ge. Jaza dinde pongbo di ta sa ani pongbo de nga yin sambe gi ta ngan jin so tang jin de ke ro ge. Ani tang jin de nga de ka so da tang jin de je so ta pongbo de nge yin sambe nga yi we tang jin du sti ge ro sa da kurim ro che we na ro ge. Tangbo de pongbo temba du ba ra shin ro ba jin ba nang ro ge. Nam ga shi re sam yi che ro ge. Jaza ani pongbo de ya ta ka so re de le ming ne ngan jin ki ge ro ge. Tang jin ki re so ge. 다 당보 간지 계사베셔도 풍부된 예 풍부를 해서 배로와 나이와 좀 배로와게 좀도 스티게 배로 계담 그린로 된대를 배사 당보 풍부된 수
다 잡진데 가래
괜찮아서 하게 다다게 예 쉬베도 괜찮아서 하게 당보 풍부된 랑시도 받진 로하게
디네 더뭐 간지지라게 더 되는 거에 지금 됐어
맞게 당보되게 풍부된 랑을 주바 사게 나가로하게 나만의 시대를 시험버려서하게 대디 시에 아니 당 나이와 가서 너무 가서 달래서 가지면 간지게로하게 간지 디슈라 안 나이와 짐바 슈월 디 타이나 가지면 좀 딘데를 배고 고림디
라
고림디 딘데를 배서 고림디 당보대 풍부되게 다 랑원 두바성벌 다 좀게 나가로하게 나만의 시대 레서 시험버려하게 자단 제마 디왕 전에 nganjimbe nganje de ke roage tangbo ngashe ta la shenjue ta tangjin de ke roage ta jishu niba de roa de chang ne ngayiwa jemba de phungbo de nge phungbo roage ko korimra bo de ne shago roa sage
그런데 뭐네서는 되래 가서 당보 풍고를 메고 쓰고로
나오
당디 제도 당에 초이 당진에 제리서
알로노서
당고 풍고를 가서 풍고를 마음에 봐 가서 뭐야 용어로
알로노서
저 당보 풍고 메고서
phungbo temba jibe de
풍고 temba 띵에 제리서
noso
델다비 가서 대신에 가서
nge phungbo sti wo so
다 다음에 도저상 다 총폐샤 시즈는 예 가서 다음에 예 도그레스 다 뭐 이자 믿어 봐요다
noso
다 배지를 보시더나 또 그런 제고 말이 신에 가서 다음에 예 도그레스 이자 페샤 되지리
noso
당시 제베 바시는 쉬이다 닝게 다음에 또 바시는 예 가서 다음에 도그레스 시동 용자 자시아를 신나오디리
ale ten mora ta da jo da thangbo gen chuk tangje ro phungbo lo me phungbo temba ro nang di re sabi se chuk tangje ke ro ge da di tha ne ani ka so da khasa ka tangje ke ro
phungbo 유시네 나세 phungbo le me ngada ngai
ji ro nga thyo yeah I want to make sure that Geshe understood right because we said yes that Geshe are you sure understood or I said anything clear right because I don't want to misrepresent yes just as you said so in terms of the arisal of grasping at the self of a person and self phenomena, in terms of the arisal of grasping, first there arises grasping at the self of phenomena. That means the aggregates, right, appear to us intrinsic existence, then we believe in that, right? And then there arises grasping at the self of a person or the person, right? Then I and mine, right? So that's work. Now, in terms of generating the realization, understanding of selflessness is that most of the scholars say that first we understand the selflessness of a person and then the selflessness of phenomena. So you see how the the sequence is really changed there with me. So, of course, Benjamin will have a little slightly different take on that, or it doesn't make the difference. But many others say, first, we realize the selflessness of a person, and then we realize the selfless of phenomena. But in terms of the arisal of graspings, for there arises the grasping at the self of phenomena, aggregates, right? Without, aggregates in the mind, how can we have person, right? So, and then there arises the grasping at I and mind, my body, so my aggregates, yes. Yeah.
So, okay, we got that. Next, second one more.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, one more.
Yeah.
In terms of the direct yogic perception of the Four Noble Truths.
Yes.
So according to what we said, if I remember correctly, is that the Prasangika's position is that an ordinary person is doing
can have it.
Can have it.
Yes.
Now, are we not including the path of seeing as part of the Four Noble Truths? Because my understanding is the last two parts of the Noble Truth are actually referring to the path of seeing, which means you are transcendental. Okay. So can we clarify what's going on?
Sure. Thank you. Questions are clear. Makes my life easy. Mora kandi niba shue jirwage. Ta dagi mora kono theme na sarwage. Oma tenjo be lugla ya ana soje gi ana nenjong musum rwage. Temba shida tenshi meta so churu la mewege nenjong musum di soje la ya yong chog res la rwa. Oma tenjo be rwage. Di yimba ina sa ta mora khota no me na rwage. Ana temba shi na la ya lamden yorwa sarwage. Lamden di ene toni da derwage tonglam rwage tonglam din al sudi yo marwe sarwage tonglam din al sudi yo ba ina ene soje kyol ya de tonglam ki du go sigi jirwage kansa denshi meda so chudu la mi be gi nenjong musum soje kyol yong chogo yo ba ina rwage denshi na la ya lamden yo lamden din al tonglam yo marwe tonglam yo ba ina soje nang la tonglam kan cha de res ko sa chuba
this is thing ya de la ma rabe meda chudu 또 내서 무슨 이 무슨 참았다고 가서 소리 줄 무슨 요말
알레 알텐조브 소엔디 알라락바 프랑스 샤샤베데 요소
라바 그런 것은 또 그래서 다 tenjo 제가 데려와 가서 요당 대세 런주 문제 대세나 당시 대입니다 주로 무슨 또 소리 짠 요말다
알레 랑제 때문에 제일 더 받았다 통남 샤고 저거
어디 방도 그러고 다 tenjo 라바 미사 주로 무슨 또 소리 라면 통과 말이죠.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question. So here's, I think this can clarify for all of us. So when Prasangika say that, right, they're kind of in debate with the Seventh Madhyamika school below, who say that ordinary people cannot have direct yogic perception of the Four Noble Truths and the existing attributes, right? Prasangika say it's possible, right? So Prasangika is really kind of debating with their standpoint, and which Prasangika feels that ordinary people could have direct yogic perception of the Four Noble Truths and 16 attributes. The path includes their version of the selflessness, right? Yes, right. The self-sufficient, existent self, which for them is not really real emptiness, isn't it? But if you think in terms of the subtle emptiness of person don't say subtle emptiness, the way person right, then it's not possible that ordinary people could have direct yogic perceptions. I'm glad you asked that, so that clarification, right? But according to the lower schools of thought, right, they said why it only exists in the Aryas is because for them, right, realizing the path, realizing the selflessness of self-sufficient and substance existent self is a path of seeing, right? So that's very clear. Thank you. Yes. Here, the Losanda question. Yeah.
Is there another question?
Yeah.
Do you have a question?
Oh.
Yeah.
All right.
Oh, you have a question. Okay.
I have a question,
Okay.
actually.
Yeah.
I was trying to see, how does one practice the emptiness of sound? I guess if I was trying to see, because that was interesting. I mean, you can see the object. You can use a building or a wall or floor as your object of negation, but sound, that's
how
does one do that?
emptiness sound? Okay. 다 고랑한테 쉐데디레 제전 거대 투도 메더서 다다기 께 가르서 고래 내가 좀 잠시우게 리우시 샤천에 로하게 chamshu ki liu shisha chena rwagen ana sugla da pe jaba de ta rigba jaba ina thala yang rwagen namda ge tha rwagen kwenda ge tha rwagen ene karsa di chuing ge tha su yong chu rwagen 세상 추잉 차스데다 추잉되게 자기 동반이 세고 와게 세상 제 동반이 데 컨트롤 삼당 거서 달로 동반이 들어와게 제 동반이 있어요 저로 와제 동반 차차차게 싹가다 가다다 차차 암조 토에 차 들어와게 네 동반이 있으면 삼로 간다 당고 그래서 차 암조 토에 차
암조가
네 동반서
这个 군다기
라고 근데 어디 네 군다 찾으러 와 네 가서 단데 네 가서 again the chewing guitar 그 chewing guitar 저
군다기 소이 남다 송주
라로 the chewing guitar 디 동반이로 와
소이 자랑 유저 동바의 소이 자스
어디 간데 삼로 당고 그래서 그러게
지금 다 소도 그거다 다랑 저 강갈 대다 미지야
I think the Geshe-la's the explanation is if you understood, right, emptiness with regard to a form, right, if that's something you can handle it, right, then basically it's the same, you are thinking about the same thing in terms of sound, right? Sound is also empty of intrinsic existence, right? That's what we call sound emptiness, right? Just like a form, we said form has a pure form, which is basically the real form, and there's an imputed form, which is the intrinsicness label on the form, it doesn't exist anyway. And then there is the emptiness form, which is form itself is empty of intrinsic existence, right? If that's something you can handle, right? So now, you're just changing the basis. It's the sound, right? And so it's right. It shouldn't be that, in a sense, difficult. It's the same reasoning. Yeah.
Sitting with it, I guess you can analyze it in the same way,
course.
right?
Yes.
But I guess what I'm saying is, sitting with it, just.
No, I understand. All of a sudden, it sounds a little bit right, but if you analyze it, then you come to right.
Yeah, I guess it makes sense. I guess.
So I'm thinking about all these guys that they had these schools we're discussing, and they get to a point when they go, aha, this is it.
Mm-hmm.
And they must have had some sort of experience.
Yeah.
But then somebody else comes along later and goes, no, that wasn't it. So what happened to the aha experience?
Right.
Was it experience of liberation or bliss? I mean, how do we grade these categories of attainments and realizations? You see, I'm kind of making it up as I go along. Do you see where I'm going?
No,
Okay.
I understand what you're saying. Yeah. Right.
Um,
So how do we make sure that aha moment, what kind of aha moment is that what you're saying?
They must have some sort of individual experience
Sure.
just opened their mind, or it just
Right.
appeared how it is,
Sure.
or something.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
that's not revealed.
Sure. Okay.
We're just revealing the reasoning, but it must have changed somebody to have these realizations at the moment it happened. Okay.
Okay. Yes.
But we don't talk about that.
Yes.
right?
I got it. Yeah. The Quran is sometimes the grow that and the drupda nang dusi damada chiyo rawage. And then ben nangbe nanglo drupda kongwa dusi manda chiyo rawage. And that duda oma ki tapena Quran the pede shamas the king pe shasana ge yagasema rawage. Pena kansa rangja thebe je ji tongwa chi tokwa ina rawage. Ta ko dingwana tokwa rawage nyamyo rawage. 제 칼이야 코란문에 즉 똑바 믹스해서 총을 삼아 코란이야 다 손아진 거로 왔어 와게 다이네 디 가서 텐주백으로 와다 이네 차랑 또야 디 담에 가서 딱 문에 잔에 또야 말서 라보로 와게 지대 갈라 또 문에 잔에 또 마도 세디 간에 사고로 와게 가서 랑제 되베 제 동화 또선에 거기 좀 만다진 거로 와게 똑바디 와게
그런 저 가랑자도 저 또 받텔라 다음에 또 선서디 저한테다 대요 계링으로
So I think Geshe says that, like let's say I use a particular example so that Geshe can probably see it clearly rather than, right? So in the case of lower schools of Buddhist thought, so when they realize selflessness or emptiness of a self-sufficient and substantial existent person, this is real, deep, profound aha moment, isn't it? And from Prasangika point of view, they're not going to invalidate it. They say, that is a realization, but that's not the final one, right? It's a very deep realization, but you still need to analyze, and because there is reality that is beyond that, so to speak. Are you with me? So that aha moment is validated. That's true because the person can agree with that, right? But that is still not adequate to get out of samsara kind of thing.
Then doesn't it, the previous ultimate realization, doesn't it destroy the previous realization?
Oh, I see. When kansa tangme chamu to when the rangje to be ji tong to she tong wa de phe ma do di tok ba phe ma do ye du ma re so ge. When tenjo be tong be ta tangme tong yin tong na ro ge. Da ge wo to tong yin ta ta ma dang ge ro ge. Ni ne ge tok ba de phe ma do je pa ye du ma re so ge.
Mara ko rangya te be ko rakpa ji ba.
No.
Sena ko dondo ji chu wa da.
La ro.
Ma do dondo thara ma wo yo ro.
La re.
rāngyā tēwa khānsā dāmi rākpā rīyā wā rō. Sīnā kō mī kō kēshī, tuwa jī, mēwa jī yuwa jī ngā wā rō. Kō mēwa tō sō na, yā kō rō kō dōndō jī sē rū rō, pēntō dī wā rō.
Ālō kō dī tōkpa dī wā yē rō, mēwa chāk dī kī
yē rō mā rī, kō mūni sā lō tōng dī rō wā. Kō yē kō mā rī kō.
Yēnā dī kī mā chīt kō tāme tāmo tō āyā pēntō kō wā rō dā.
Pēntō kō, dī pēntō kō.
Geshe says, yeah, I mean, that, for example, aha moment, realization of the selfness presented in the lower school, it is a correct realization, right? So it's not going to be invalidated by a higher level of realization, because we have so many doubts and misunderstanding as we remove every one of them, right? So the correct perception that replaces it is a valid one. So nobody can invalidate or it becomes useless, right? But then, I mean, you kind of understand that different levels, right? So whatever you realize, that is a profound realization. As a matter of fact, this realization could help you to realize the subtle selflessness or the emptiness person you could talk about. Yeah. Let me, you. Yeah, okay, whoever, yeah.
I think Geshe said there was a third kind of karma that was immutable. Could he please give an example? Thank you.
Sure. Tagi kengi miyo be le sung sung again. Miyo be le sing di kande le kande chide di deshe chiro na sa miyo be le ki sud sume ki la ro again. Miyo be le sing di da kwa cha ge ma ro again.
Miyo le sa this ore. So sume le sa dil sa na ko di na min do 뇽 어디서 소소밀 깨기리마도 내대야 이니 대반자와 인소 현다 파도 요토 말이지. 네. 여와도는 대체 두자되냐? 배나 혼자물린 깨아니야. 장점을 깨져서 유주당하여 봐.
알아서.
단다데 미열에 소소밀 깨레데 소소밀랑 야 팽기리마도 대바도 대라 히라 팽 말이. 그런 카도 이게 누구였다니 미워서 미워서 주라면 그거라.
라우. 근데 지금 이제 미워를 배를 샤면 게 침발을 스타나로 와게. 당한 수도 숨멜이 야께서 침발 스타나서나 레디 미워를 레기 답배를 샴 되거나. 맨날 콘저게 구님에게 살고.
소소메 레디 페이지 짐바도 다다 쇼리어도 여러분. 비 소소메 자 땡인지 그거라. 희네 그거라.
알레로. 신의 인지 그거. 알레 신의 인지 타고.
신의 나도니가 타고 소울게나. 소소메께서.
알레 신의 하도 되게 레사서나 쓰고. 레레 인지 미지긴 수도 숨발 미고래 버나 신의 하도 때문에 침바다 서바 고미션의 숙소메 깨고.
진짜 팬서로 와. 진짜 소소메께 그거 정말 레르 땡인지 실라 마서는 소소메께 말아.
So in the case of what we call unchanging or immutable karma, right? That can yield rebirth in the form and formless realms existence. So why it's called immutable is that kind of karma, once you create it, it will definitely, right, yield one's rebirth either in the form of formless. It's not going to, yield as a rebirth in somewhere else. So that is called immutable. It means definite, right? It cannot be changed into something. Whatever the outcome is, that's what it's going to be. It cannot be. And for that kind of karma, Geshe says, one first should have achieved karma binding and special insight, right? Only then, right, we could create that kind of a karma, without which we cannot, But other karmas, like even good karmas, let's say we have created a good karma to be reborn in the southern continent, Jambudvipa, But then for some reason, some other condition came, and instead of being in the southern continent, we end up in the northern continent, right? That's possible. It could change, right? But the immutable karma could not. That's the sense of it. Yeah. 제자기 미유벌 내 고랑기 빼치자로 제사 천시지 로게 미유벌 내 천시시 하나 가르쳐 버서게 되긴 쉬되마게 실라 로베체
삼대 당보저야 깨야게 디레 실라 수지 자 남지 부지 샤쇼지
아 실라 수는 남 다가라
삼대 당보자 무지도
it's just like, say, when you have already achieved calm abiding, a special insight, and then you want to be reborn in the first stage, dhyana stage, right? Right. So that kind of karma is an example of immutable karma, right? You have calm abiding and special insight, but you want to be reborn in the first dhyana stage. Not have to be. You could, right? You could, right? Yeah. Not have to be. Yeah. Oh no. You could, right? I mean, once you create that karma, it's unchanging. It will yield in the first stage or whatever it is, right? But you don't have to, right? You could get some other karmas too, but you know.
Don't other karmas control those karmas?
What?
Don't other karmas control those karmas?
See, the Quran somebody did think the work game. 가서 배나 실라 그 송대 톱사나 삼된 당보를 제인 들어가게 인지 민지 실라 톱사 삼된 당보 미서 레샹바 사야 메딩 들어가게 가서 미요발라
삼대 당보제 미요레서 실라 모도나 요마레
이네 삼대 당보 가서게 인지 민지 삼대 당보 레사 과요 말 실라 톱사나 레담을 먹고 사쇼로 그러더라 실라 송대 톱사나 인지 민지 삼대 당보를 기에 레지고 사고 말 레샹바 사쇼로 와게
그래서
그러와
이제다 마사를 거 삼대 당보제 삼대 당보스 깨야다 레지 사고로 그 삼대 당보지 고지고로 다 대지 인산의 이바고 이거 돼야 그 카드 저다 리본이 튕고고요
So I think if we can think it in terms of this, right, there are different levels of existence, right? We have 4 dhyana stages, everything, right? So if you want to be reborn in these stages, so first thing is we must have calm abiding, shamatha, and vipassana, special insight. Now we are able to create a karma that can help us to be reborn in the first stage and then second stage like that. That's the thing, right? Yeah, in that framework. Did Latme get it? Yeah.
Was there some?
Well, this just to follow up a little bit. This itself is the karma, right? It's not, technically speaking, it's not karma, but karma abiding and special insight is what precipitates the rebirth, right?
Oh, I see.
That's an example of it, right?
Oh, is that is self-example?
Yeah. Even though it's not karma technically, because it's concentration, not intention.
Right. Quran says you got a shila sundegi things in top tagara a miyubale chadugo yamarvesa yake. The Chayan reaching about Kong and the Chad.
The go ya tabatoya is Samde tabatoya ikasha ya lam gonge ya kasha Tajida did a lam Samde tambo ya tonda any lam gum shila sungri and did that Samde
Yeah, Geshe said, yeah, I mean, that calm abiding and special insight is a must, right, to be able to be reborn there. But you could use that calm abiding and special insight for some other purpose too, right? Instead of going to the first stage, you might go to the nirvana, right? You could do it, right? Yeah.
About going back to the yogic, direct yogic perception, I've asked that question before. Geshe said that I asked it from the perspective of Svatantrika. According to them, you cannot really, ordinary person cannot have direct yogic perception, right? Svatantrika. And I thought that Prasangika were the same.
Or Svatantrikas would say...
Ordinary person cannot have a direct yogic perception.
Right.
Okay.
Right,
like
only Aryas could have.
Yeah, but by doing that, don't they kind of invalidate the very term noble truth? Because this only noble implies that it's a truth for an Arya being. the Prasangika said, for example, that even an ordinary person, not a noble person, can realize, have a direct yogic perception of impermanence. We're not talking about selflessness or emptiness, impermanence. Now, if this is the case, then it's not a noble truth.
You mean from Prasangika, from
Prasangika,
Savatantaka's point of view?
Prasangika point of view.
Oh, yes. Oh, okay.
If an ordinary person can realize subtle impermanence,
okay.
that means that's not a noble truth, because noble truth means only an Arya person can realize it. So they kind of negate the whole notion of a noble truth.
Okay, sure.
Right?
Okay, sure. Oh, now I got it, yes. Quran can show that this go again. That and then anzo tagi Umar Rangju Pad ki Chevina ane Karsogore Tenshi Mitasu Churul maybe Nenjo Musum de and Pabwe Julamashi, Kibu Tamar Yonchok Marilla Rawage. Omar Rangube Chevina Rawage, Tenshi Mitasu Churul Tobak, Nenjo Musum this, Pabwe Julamado, Soja Jul Yonchok Marilla Rawage. In a Tenjubek Lavina, and a Soja Jula Yonchok Res Lavage. Situ Kaliata, Nazo Namju, Tembas Laja Rawage. Temba say touch was a seven and Temba di Dirwake. That been a tingible when a Tevina, Omar Rangjubergi at Chasha Temba di Teba Maimba Chada Yomarvesa, when it saw Yomarwage. Omar Rangjubergi, Tosha Temba di Temba Maimba Chada Yomarves, Temba when it on a Tony Togo they thought Yomarwa, the Koranzu Chiglab de Store there again. This
Rondo Rakwas show, you Nijimuso Rakwato, the Chamoto, Sidua, Mutawa in a Mutawa Chamoto is better. That Mutawa sits on Shidra and over the Saina Mirror, the Dretona, Mutawa Rakwato, Zero.
In a Mitawa,
Getting Juro, getting Chamon, Mutawa, Zero.
Namjing as a Benaki Kambaji with the Mishiro at the Midaba Tors, like the Midaba Dona, Midaba Chamato, with Tablora. That could be some time with the Rataton, Tabatona, Tabit, Tabat Tartable dog or what did you thought the Yomarwage?
Ronji was in a Suzu,
all over the
that. Thank you, your short is a website
in a Ranja to be J, Tonga Delia, Tembetanya Jugur, but the Tembaslam Nakoti, Karsota, get Tonglam, Temba Shashu.
Nejo was a Sherman, Tom, Palam Shermarda, Nejo was you. Then the Ronju mediation, Nejo was a power giver,
No, no, the house came.
That Nejo was so usually.
No, they never around you, Koran 7 Palam radio, or Pagway machine, or Chogo Yomaroge, right?
Ronju that Nejo was a power giver.
You almost like Sedu Kalate, Ranjubergi, the Tenjubi chairman, Soja Leon Chogo years are Wage, Ranjubi shared the idea, what Temben needs to the remedy was a what Temba Takdars, my Kansana. You don't make him at Dagdadi Gomara, Chinaco Peto. So the any concept Tenshi Nilu, Hamago Chagamaraves, Ranjubi, Tembeshi Niludi.
What did that? Take your illusion that they will Zawad Haku, Tom and Marva Koraku, Ramsey to a killing or this is Tom and Marva Koran. Yapu goes into your mother.
Taine consequence de Ranjubergi, Takaji Casora. Nangwe to that Kanga log that Kanji de Rangi Tama Tama de Go, I think you will do the work. Yeah, I'm just want to make sure that Geshe understood the thing and we just sort it out. So as we said, Savatantaka Madhyamikas, right, their standpoint is that only transcendental or Arya beings could have a direct yogic perception of the Four Noble Truths, 16 attributes, right? Ordinary people cannot have it. Prasangika says that looking at them, right, ordinary people could also have it, right? And the reason is that the selflessness of self-sufficient and substantial existent person, that truth regarding, is actually accepted by all Buddhist schools of thought. Even Prasangikas also accept it, but they say that's not the final truth, right? That's the only. So you cannot invalidate it because they also accept it as a valid perception, but that's not the final, right? The final reality truth. So that's what Geshe was saying.
What about direct perception of impermanence?
Could there be
Yogic, no, there is, like, there is a yogic direct perception of
Right, right.
impermanence.
a,
So it's the same for Prasangikas and Svatantrika.
okay, right.
There's no difference.
the
So,
definite-
so
yeah.
it really, how could they say that one can have that without, are they saying that one can have that on the basis of having realized selflessness? Is it what they're saying? Prasangika is saying that you can have a yogic direct perception of impermanence on the basis of having realized selflessness of a self-sufficient, substantially existent person.
Okay, yeah. Alors, Quran this was ben tenshi meda churu so gi ben mida wala shasha na rwa ge. Mida wala ya mi be ki ene nenjong usum yo choko mar ba sa rwa ge. Mida wala mi be ki nenjong usum yo choko ro ba sa rwa ge. Ye be ina dinde mida wala me be nenjong usum di oma rangjue ba da oma tenju ba ni ga lo rwa. Sa ko dije manda ke ma chiku chinya rwa sa go ge.
오다 인가 미자 또 그거 요바데 찍바래
직발 와서 제자면에 내종 무슨 여발라 인지 민지 로하게 가서 그래 배나 다음에 또 내종 무슨 찍을 때니 내종 무슨 요구야 말 와서게
네 말이야
okay, so hopefully this answers Geshe says yes, I mean it is possible to have a direct yogic perception of impermanence which is exactly the same accepted by both Savatanta Madhyamika school and Prasangika Madhyamika school. But to be able to have that yogic perception, it's not contingent upon, right, the realization of selflessness, right? It's not contingent upon the realization of the selflessness either presented in that school or whatever, right? Yeah. So you could have, yeah, separate. That's what it is. Yeah, yeah. Thank you. Okay. Any other thoughts? How about people behind the clothes? What? Oh, you mean the impermanence is not noble, you mean? Yeah. It's supposed to be. Right. Okay. That's why I was asking before. I Geshe did not answer that. Let me see. Yeah. The Quran that thought you said they did again. Answer Pakbe Temba Lai Shorwa again. When a Midaba Chigo maybe in Nejung some year choco you not again. Midaba thought that the Pakbe Temba Taju Shame it was a Pakbe Temba like the Tashe Jabba again. Pakbe Temba like them again that Temba the Tolam the Shaguchi River that kind of digging session again. When a Midasa Judu again, that Dharma the Tongba Pashavaki, the Midaba thought they let Temba Pakbe Temba say Chadu in the water.
미답 찍어도 되면 마도 그 드레게 요즘에 그래서 돈을 담아서도 당면도 돈을 더 그러와 당면도 되네 미답하고서 또뭐 담아 돈도 미답하고서 또 돈을 더 말봐 그래서 당면고서도 돈을 더 그러와
알레 디샤네 대바세 두샤데 마데 치당 안조
미답하고서 또 예답 내가 좀 용거다 돈은 양바 샤워가 돈이 뭐 당면이 또 말봐
알레 노서 알레 디 마도갈 베나케 대바시 마미시 대바실라 마데메 저러게 미다랑 찍어줄 미베기 내종 무슨 게 초고로 베게 통람 하동에는 미다바 찍어줄 미베 무슨 게 초고로 와
미답 저도 돈 마도 나 저저 요 말에 미답 또 내송 거서 요 말에
맞아 tinjuba chen yo shogoro wa
yo shogoro
side kal dinde nenjong musum dela pabe tembas ta jugu maro again
the pabe devas do maro
okay yeah okay now this will clarify just I have to ask different question otherwise Geshe is not answering it so here's the deal it's possible to have according to Prasangikas okay we have to keep this track it's possible to have direct yogic perception of impermanence right without tied up with the Four Noble Truths. But that yogic perception does not get the name Noble Truth. Okay? But when we say Noble Truth, it's like that once you achieve the path of seeing, when the first path of seeing is the realization of emptiness, isn't it? So you're already in the state of absorbed meditation emptiness. When you come out of that meditation, now you will also have direct perception of impermanence and other attributes, right? So that kind of realization is tied up with the path of seeing, so it Noble Truth comes. So now that is all right. So I have to ask different questions, otherwise let's not answer it here. Thank you. Okay, I think we already have time up today, so please say we have a prayer request. I have some too. I forgot the time when it's so exciting. Yeah.
So before we read our prayer requests, we have a reminder about an event on our upcoming schedule, and this is something we do every year as a means of observing the great Lama Tsongkhapa's passing into Parinirvana. We hold a Nyungne fasting retreat the weekend before the actual day of commemorating Lama Tsongkhapa's passing. So this year, it is on December 6th through the 8th, the weekend of December 6th through the 8th. So please keep that on your calendars in terms of the Nyungne retreat in December. And the Jamju Shungilaya, Tsilideva, Tungmi Jamju Shungilaya, Tsilideva Win Van Tanza, Hasan Kininga, Trongsharva, and Kongi Shedula, and Tungmeta, the Netsedan Demba, the crowns and Namidi to you, Shendit, the Janani, Shabdin in the Durus, Milam the Jarus shooting crowns are Trent Tang, Leslie Nguyen, Michelle Nguyen, and the Chawalam Yonatan, and Pajet Kanye, Seagitandala, and Tumanaronas. Tini Kazakini Vietnam Laya Chulo Javalatene Mimang the Tabsi Shushamatesha the crowns of Chudla Kanye Shiag Chuditumi Naranas. So prayer requests today for those who have recently passed away include prayers requested for Nguyen Van Tan, who passed away the day before yesterday. So please keep them, please keep Nguyen Van Tan in your prayers and dedications. May Nguyen Van Tan and all of those who have recently passed be free from all suffering and purified of all negative karma accumulated since beginningless times. May they be reborn with all precious freedoms and endowments. May they meet the Dharma and a qualified guru and quickly achieve liberation and enlightenment. Prayer requests for those who are still with us include prayers for Trent Tang, Leslie Nguyen, Michelle Nguyen, and family. Prayers for their for blessings, good luck, and fortune, and their well-being. And then prayers requested also for the coastal communities of Vietnam that have been heavily affected by recent floods. So please keep those communities and the individuals' names that I just read in your prayers and dedications. May they be free from all obstacles, hardship, and negative karma. May their wishes and prayers be fulfilled. May they be guided by the blessings of the three jewels, and may they experience everlasting peace and happiness.
Thank you, Geshe-la. I have two more names to add to that. Corby Winkleman, a nurse, she passed away this week from cancer, so please pray for her. And for someone who needs healing prayer, Fabian Friedman, requests prayer for healing. Nenarwa Fabian Friedman, the Thungme Kamjuda, send a Corby Winkleman, so first we will do the Medicine Buddha prayer for healing, and then I will look for a prayer for the deceased. Toje Wala Nyombe, Jomden, Zenzang Tebe, Yendun Dung Yansen, Luzon is a Sangye, Mengia, Binduri. Chanze lo Om Namo Bhagavate Bhagaze Guru Binduya Tabaranzaya Tadangadaya Arahade Samya Sambudaya Teyata Om Bhagaze Bhagaze Man Bhagaze Bhagaze Ranza Samungade so Teyata Om Bhagaze Bhagaze Man Bhagaze Bhagaze Ranza Samungade so. Eda Om Bhagaze Beganze, Beganze, Man, Beganze, Beganze, Ranzo, Samungadi, So, Han, Gawa, Di, Nyodo, Da, Membe, Gebo, Dojo, Dova, Chijan, Deye, Sala, Gawa, Sho, Avalokiteshvara. Chadong, Golun, Gyube, Gebo, Don, Jendong, Geba, Sangbe, Sangye, Don, Kangla, Kangde, Dela, Jumba, Jere, Zela, Changze, De, Ommani, Peme, Hong. Omani, Beme, Hori, Gawa, Di, Nyodo, Da, Jere, Sewan, Rubju, Dowa, Jija, Maluwa, Deye, Sala, Geba, Sho. Page 3 of the prayer booklet. Lord Gyaltsen, Yudong, Bega, De, Kesam, Pove, Judo, Mimba, Sen, Demba, Zinla, Wangdo, Gij, Tanya, Jowen, Jola, Sowan, De, page 5. Mawa Dame, Gunjen, Donga, De, Kangri, Zhongsho, Nida, Senze, Zhanggun, Yawa, Niwa, Yapse, Je, Zhangshon, Dinzi, Mawe, Shiba, Dinzin, Chebe, Jingguan, Zebe, Je, Xieje, Nigun, Changzhou, Tendu, Gongdo, Tamzhe, Bebe, Beiyun, Je, Duja, Gyatzu, Gundo, Shabde, Tesan, Gongda, Chezu, Zongbe, Ze, Yongzhou, Yuri, Tube, Nyak, Long Rie, De Yen, Nebe, Beden, Ba, Tubden, Kangri, Dabo, Shabde, Dona, Kongmen, Zaba, Namda, Gwen, Dendang, Rube, Pende, Jove, She, Hundo, Jume, Chebe, Kesan, Duje, Dundo, Shabden, Sho, Chizu, Lame, Tugye, Melam, Kesan, Duje, Dendam, Zangmen, Du, Chozon, Todo, Jido, Jida, Membe, Lungu, Lundu, Sho, page 9. Ramjan Jingen, Gombo, Zaba, Men, Zodo, Namje, Geyun, Drama, Sho, Zezo, Zeye, Tazo, Tamje, Daden, Mishe, Choge, Mudu, Tubden, Jeda, Losan, Yawa, Shiru, Denban, Zembe, Beiyun, Tade, Lije, Jongwe, Xin, Yangzhe, Ninje, Wongbo, Sowa, De, Jiden, Sumgwe, Chana, Beme, Denbe, Zawa, Soso, Taba, Namda, Zudin, Yangda, Lam. Losan, Gaden, Bedo, Shabden, Sho, Tuzhon, Gyaltsen, Nongzhen, Yangbe, Samzhou, Namzhe, Sangzhen, Zhonbe, Gomzhon, Shela, Tenbe, Ngada, Zhenbo, Shabden, Sho, Chebe, Donga, Gowa, Bozo, Zhenbe, Rilang, Sivu, Zhenbe, Dunde, Leshe, Dangzha, Zhu, Kedu, Xinyin, Chenbo, Shabden, Kebe, Langdo, Gushe, Zeda, Zhenbe, Chara, Nyezo, Sangwe, Lije, Rigo, Yishe, Sumden, Xinyin, Chenbo, Shabde, Tesan, Rulang, Zhobe, Dende, Menjo, Daju, Zame, Sije, Labje, Zende, Denju, Besha, Sende, Xinyin, Chenbo, Shozon, Gyawa, Seje, Chenla, Tuden, Damje, Songmen, Sona, Daza, Lasan, Dabe, Dem, Jida, Membe, Dungu, Lundo, Sho, Changzhou, Simzhou, Rinpo, Maje, Bana, Yewa, Nyamba, Mewa, Yang, Pewa, Sho, Dongni, Dawa, Rinpo, Maje, Bana, Yeju, Yewa, Nyamba, Me, Gongde, Gongdo, Bewa, Sho, Sa, Shi, Beji, Jushi, Medo, Zhang, Rira, Lingxi, Ninde, Yenba, De, Sangye, Shindo, Mede, Viwa, Logwe, Nanda, Xingla, Jeba, Shu, Kari, Rabe, Gorbe, Xinganzo, Pendang, Dewa, Malu, Zhongwe, Jere, Sewa, Tenzin, Gyatso, Shabe, Seden, Bado, Denju, Ji, Yedang, Guru, Rana, Niyanda ya me yawa kwando yangda lama dan deme cheje bela loje sada lamje yende rabzo nen doje nge goba